Now, as far as my own experience with the chip controlled intake, I personally do not feel or hear anything any differently happening at 6,750 RPMs. When you say VMAX, one of the first things that come to people's minds is V-boost. For people that don't even know much about the VMAX, the one thing that they do know is V-boost. They may not even know exactly what V-boost is, but they just associate V-boost with VMAX. And often in the comments that I have noticed on my channel, and actually on other channels, that when people start talking about the VMAX, the second generation, someone will always ask, well, what about the V-boost? How's the V-boost? Well, I have to give them the bad news when it comes to V-boost and the second generation, because this one simply does not have it. But it does have something else. But before I get into that, let me just explain a little bit about what V-boost is and how it worked and what basically made it so popular. And V-boost is basically where each cylinder has two carburetors feeding air and fuel into it. Normally, each cylinder has one carburetor, but the design of the V4 on the VMAX allowed the cylinders to share carburetors, because they had two cylinders in the front of the engine and two cylinders directly behind those two front cylinders, and there was a little butterfly valve that joined two cylinders together. So just think of the front right cylinder as cylinder number 1, and directly behind it is cylinder number 3. Well, basically there was a little tube that connected the two together, and at the appropriate RPM, this butterfly valve would gradually start opening up to allow fuel and air from the other carburetor over to the one directly in front of it or directly behind it. At 5,750 RPMs, that butterfly valve would start to open up and basically share those two carburetors until eventually it hit 8,000 RPMs, and then the butterfly valve was fully wide open, which meant that each cylinder had two carburetors entirely at its disposal. Now, according to Yamaha, that added 10% horsepower to the engine. So that's one of the things that made the VMAX, the original VMAX, famous, was its V-boost, and that was one of the things that clearly distinguished it between the other V4s at the time. And all of that was possible because it used carburetors. Now, when we fast forward to 2009, the new generation VMAX does not have carburetors. It has fuel injection. So you really can't share the carburetors between adjacent cylinders. But what Yamaha has on the VMAX second generation, the 1700, is this thing called Yamaha chip controlled intake. Now, I don't think it's designed to replace V-boost or mimic V-boost, but it does involve the intake, which the V-boost did as well. And what the Yamaha chip controlled intake, YCC-I, what it does is basically it varies the length of the air funnels, and it does this to time the reflected air pressure coming from the tips of the funnels back to the intake valve. And it's designed to time it in such a way that the reflected air pressure gets to the intake valve at the right time when the valve is opening. And at low speeds, this is best achieved with longer funnels. And at their full length, the funnels on the VMAX 1700 are 150 millimeters. and at 6,750 RPMs the funnel shorten. Basically the top 2/3 of the funnel basically lift up out of the way, essentially now having an air funnel that's only 52 millimeters long, which times the reflected air pressure back to the intake at the higher RPMs, because the intake valves are open for a shorter period of time. So anyway, it's all a timing issue, and that's basically the theory behind that. Now, I have never read anything on how much horsepower this really adds to the motorcycle. So, and I don't believe that Yamaha has made a claim, and I haven't seen anybody test this theory one way or the other. But that would be interesting to see that happen. Measure the difference in horsepower, or even torque for that matter, by disabling the funnels, either by leaving them long all the time or shortening them all the time. That would be curious. But anyway, that's kind of the long and short, no pun intended, of the Yamaha chip controlled intake versus the V-Boost. So again, it's totally different technology, carburetor versus fuel injection. Now, as far as my own experience with the chip controlled intake, I personally do not feel or hear anything any differently happening at 6,750 RPMs when those funnels lift up and essentially shorten the intake funnels. So it's not something that I have actually noticed. So whether or not it's increasing the power, that's beyond me, beyond my experience. But feel free to chime in if you have anything that you know more about the YCCI. But I just wanted to clarify things for those that associate V-Boost with the VMAX, and they think that the V-Boost is also on the 1700. Anyway, that's all I have on this topic. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Please give this a thumbs up if you liked it. See you next time.